Last night's preseason Week 2 matchup between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Carolina Panthers was something, I guess you could say. And we're going to talk about it. My initial takeaways from all things Jacksonville Jaguars, both offensively and defensively. Special teams, just a quick shout out here. Cam Little, still good, in case you were wondering. So we're going to be talking about that here on today's episode of Jags Now, presented by our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. But before we get into it, guys, I want to ask you, what was your number one takeaway from last night's preseason Week 2 game between Jacksonville and the Carolina Panthers, in which, look, the Jags came up short? I thought there was some things that were positive, some things that were not so positive. We're going to break it down here on today's show. All right, so getting into it, and look, coming out of preseason Week 1, there were, I don't know if it was how serious in terms of hey, this is a real competition, but there were some people that were talking in terms of hey, Carter Bradley, Nick Mullens, is there potentially some shifting that could go on there in terms of who could be Trevor Lawrence's backup in for the 2026 NFL season? Nick Mullens, I don't know if he just kind of searches his own name up on Twitter or whatever the case, social media. He has responded in terms of having really good practices throughout the week, including a really good joint practice against Carolina, before going out. And on that first drive for the Jaguars, he was 6'7", 65 yards, led to an opening drive field goal. And to me, it's ideal for Jacksonville. Not that, look, Carter Bradley, he's fine as a QB3 if you want to keep him on the practice squad, whatever the case may be. I have no problem with that. But Nick Mullens, he's been around the block in terms of the NFL. He comes in, provides a really good knowledge of the Jaguars kind of scheme, especially now second year into it, under head coach Liam Cohen. And I think he would be the ideal choice to be the backup, and I think he all but pretty much locked that up and kind of shut the door on anything Carter Bradley was kind of, at least kind of, hey, is there something there? Bradley did not have a good night. 6 of 13, 51 yards, interception, just not quite the same kind of just vibe and everything. And he, had an opportunity, I guess, throughout this week, and Nick Mullens really kind of seized that, at least in my opinion. Sticking on the offensive side of the ball, Ameer Abdullah. I talked about it, Jamari Taylor, last week in terms of hey, I really want this guy to make the roster. I think he can provide a lot of things. The more and more I thought about it, and the more you hear out of camp, and especially after yesterday, Ameer Abdullah is, if the Jaguars do keep 4 running backs, he is 100% going to make this roster. Obviously, he's been an NFL veteran for 10-plus years now, 10-plus seasons. Last night, 6 of 45, including a 23-yard run where he just stuck his foot in the ground and was getting upfield. He also added 3 receptions for 37 yards. He, to me, look, with LaQuinn Allen's injury, who's expected to be now sidelined for the rest of training camp, I think if you're the Jaguars, you should really want to keep Ameer Abdullah on this roster just because he's been there, he's done that. He can provide value on special teams, especially in the kick return department. I think he's a versatile back who can obviously, run the football, catch the football out of the backfield. As much as I like Jamari Taylor, this just kind of feels like, unless barring something unforeseen, and I'm knock on wood, I'm not wishing for anything bad for anybody, but it just seems like this is Ameer Abdullah's kind of role now. And I think this coaching staff trusts Abdullah. I think he's produced, and I think he's shown enough that even, as he's getting older in age, he's still one of the better running backs in terms of depth running backs that I think the Jaguars could have asked for. So am I expecting him to have a huge role whenever the season starts? Not necessarily, but I am expecting him to be the guy that if the Jaguars, like I said, keep 4 running backs, he seems like the guy that's earned the most trust and has provided the most value. So that is just kind of my initial thoughts there with Ameer Abdullah. We're going to talk more in terms of, the Jacksonville Jaguars Week 2 loss against the Carolina Panthers here in just a moment, but we would not be able to do today's show if it wasn't for our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. Baseball is well underway. We're getting close to postseason baseball, folks, and football. Regular season, that is right around the corner. So make sure you're locked in with Prize Picks, as it is the best place to win cash while watching sports. You can choose from numerous stat projections on Prize Picks, including passing yards, rushing yards, touchdowns, points, rebounds, assists, hits, home runs, strikeouts, and a whole lot more. And the app is really easy to use. Just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. And I've got a lineup for today's football action, along with some baseball lineup. I got Pete Crow Armstrong, the more on his total basis. I think he has been red hot. He could win MVP this year. Give me the more on his total basis today. And then I got more on Caden Davis's receiving yards and then Kendall Milton's rushing yards there. I think in that game, it's going to be an offensive showdown between those two teams here today. So, guys, cool little lineup. That's a $10 lineup to win $62.50. New user offer alert. Play your first $5 lineup and get $150 in lineups if you win that initial first $5 lineup. Just use code HMA when you sign up. That's right. PrizePicks just switched up their offer, so there's no better time to join. Lock in and win that first lineup. That's code HMA at sign up to get $150 in bonus lineups if you win that first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, code HMA. Download the app now. Thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring this episode of Jags Now. It's always good to be right. Shout out to them. All right, so getting into some more takeaways now. The rookie wide receivers continue to ball. Last night, as I'm just kind of pulling up their stats here, Josh Cameron and CJ Williams, I think I don't necessarily hate keeping Trevor Pena as well. And like on the practice squad, he showed out 4 receptions, 72 yards, caught the 1 touchdown that the Jaguars did end up scoring late there. But Cameron to me and CJ Williams, based on Williams had a really good run blocking rep where Ameer Abdullah was able to kind of spring free, and Josh Cameron still showing his ability to obviously be a downfield threat, averaged a little over 20 yards per reception. To me, in the Jaguars wide receiver room, it's pretty much kind of almost written in concrete. Like the cement is still kind of just drying, as it were. It would be obviously the top 3 with Brian Thomas Jr., Parker Washington, Jacoby Myers, and whatever order. I think we kind of know what the order is, but you get my point. Travis Hunter will have those kind of rotational snaps in terms of, him wanting to get involved as well. And then I think it's Cameron and Williams who are going to make this roster, and I think they both have looked great. They both provide, big highlight plays throughout training camp and the preseason as well. To me, they shined, and they kind of proved their worth in terms of what they can provide this football team. So I'm expecting both of those guys to make the roster. Not to mention, too, the Jaguars, I think, really want to focus more on having dual tight end sets this year. So I don't see the Jaguars keeping more than, with Travis Hunter 6, without Travis Hunter 5 wide receivers on this roster going into 2026. But that's just my opinion. We also did get a report from Liam Cohen coming out of the preseason game that provides some offensive line clarity. Cole Van Lanen is now expected to ramp up at the right tackle position going into 2026. Now, Cole Van Lanen, if you guys have been living under a rock, he has been activated off a PUP, which is absolutely huge for the Jaguars offensive line that's dealt with multiple injuries throughout training camp. And it just felt like that was a position where, they were so just like, hey, we need bodies in here, and we don't really feel comfortable with where we're at, that they made a trade with the New York Giants and inquiring Daniel Falele from the New York Giants for kind of more depth. And who knows, maybe Falele will have to step in at some point. And this kind of provides more clarity in terms of, I think this coaching staff wanted to kind of get into a rhythm, because obviously the Jaguars have had this kind of mantra of hey, we want our guys to be ready to play multiple different positions if somebody were to go down or whatever, which obviously for the Jaguars has kind of come to fruition, I guess, in some regards. But also they wanted them to start building chemistry in terms of what will this initial first offensive line look like going into week 1 and hopefully throughout the rest of the season. In my opinion, this is just how I'm reading this. I feel like it's going to be left tackle, Anton Harrison, left guard, Emmanuel Pregnon, at least barring some change that Wyatt Milam can really kind of push on the other side, because Ezra Cleveland's going to start, but I think it's going to be at the right guard spot with Robert Hainsey at center, and now Cole Van Lanen, knock on wood, hopefully he gets healthy and hopefully he gets right. He'll be slotted in there at the right tackle position. So some clarity there from Liam Cohen, who said that afterwards. And although the starters did not play last night, obviously I think that was kind of the right decision by Liam Cohen, kind of given the circumstances. I think now that we have some offensive line clarity going into the final week of preseason, getting ramped up closer to the season, this is only good news for Jaguars fans. So good on that one as well. I think another takeaway that I had is, well, I do think, and, Branson Combs, I don't think he's going to be a week 1 starter per se. To me, I came away from this game with the opinion that Ventrell Miller, while he's going to be a starter for this team, I think he just provides more in terms of the run defending ability at the linebacker spot, which, look, the Jaguars, I think they're kind of the same mindset last year. They want to be a run stopping defense first. if above all else. And I think Ventrell Miller makes the Jaguars defense a better run defense team. Therefore, I think he's going to start. But I think him and Branson Combs are going to have roles on this team. And look, Combs had a kind of a pass rush snap, last night, where I forget the running back for Carolina, but he absolutely just got tossed away by Branson Combs, and Combs was able to get into the Carolina backfield and cause a very early throw. I believe it was Bryce Young at the time. But look, Combs still can provide value in coverage. I think he can provide explosive energy. I think in blitzing situations, he can provide and show off his athleticism as well. I really think that while if I had to pick today, I think Ventrell Miller is going to be the starter at linebacker. I just think more complete player. I think he's been in this league longer, and the coaching staff trusts him. Would not shock me if Branson Combs gets a very solid amount of run in Anthony Campanelli's defense. That's just my initial kind of takeaway. Like, he still flashes for me. I know he didn't have the greatest performance against the New Orleans Saints in that preseason game, but man, I think that, like, I'm just going to pull up run defense grades here from Jacksonville last night. Yeah, look, I mean, both Ventrell Miller and Branson Combs didn't do great in the run defense department last night. I still think Branson Combs still is going to provide this team with some really good just overall help in whatever way he can, whether it's in pass coverage situations or whatever the team asks him to do. So that's just kind of my initial takeaway from that. Last thing on the defensive side, and I'll be honest, kind of hand up here, right? I've talked about how much this guy was through a training camp and an OTA's perspective, how much he was flashing in terms of, like, man, every report out of camp, Jabbar Muhammad this, Jabbar Muhammad that. I put up a video on the channel, right, talking about how I thought the Jaguars may have potentially gotten away with highway robbery with another undrafted free agent corner who looked like he could maybe seriously contribute here for the Jaguars. And so far through a couple preseason games, it has just not been great. Speaking of some kind of coverage grade stats, Muhammad was targeted 5 times last night, allowed 3 receptions for 30 yards, which 30 yards isn't like killer, but at the same time, you're going up against not starters and everything. And I think Muhammad, while I'm not saying he's not going to make the team, in terms of providing initial immediate value, I may have been a little more off base on, which hand up, right? Like, I thought based on everything we were hearing at camp, it sounded like he had a great camp. And I'm not just saying like these 2 preseason games washes away everything that he's done so far, but I truly think that Muhammad is a guy who there's a little bit of a learning curve there in terms of like getting adjusted and getting acclimated to playing higher level competition, especially when you're not going up against your same guys every day, where you can maybe have more of a tell on their tendencies in whatever case in terms of like schemes that you're running with. It's, not the worst performance in the world, but I do think Jabbar Muhammad, just kind of noteworthy through 2 preseason games, hasn't quite lived up to the hype that he's developed throughout the offseason program so far. And that'll be the it of today's episode of Jags Now, guys. Let me know down below in the comments section what is your main takeaway, I should say, from the Jaguars preseason loss to the Carolina Panthers, 34-17. And if you're on your way out now, and if you made it to the end of today's video, that makes you an absolute real one. Hit that subscribe button. We've got you covered with Jaguars content. Now we're in the preseason, throughout the regular season, and hopefully the postseason for the Jaguars here on the channel. So subscribe, lock us in, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace out.